Yeah. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of the Hockey Podcast. It is I, Kevin Olenek. Thanks for being here. This is the podcast that eats, drinks, and sleeps hockey. It's episode 2, and going through here in the NHL offseason. It's been a very interesting offseason with a lot of different stuff happening, and this one is mainly going to be focused on the offseason of the Vancouver Canucks. When we talked to Andy Cole, we had a good chunk of a conversation about the Vancouver Canucks on that, but we focused more on the broader. This, we're going to spend a lot of time on the Vancouver Canucks, but I'm going to warn you, especially if you are a Leaf fan, we are going to have a little conversation about John Tavares, and you are not going to like this conversation. I promise. This was going to be the one. We're not going to play nice about John Tavares. Oh, wait. I have, by the way, guys, that's Sean. Hello, Sean is here.
Hello.
Bearded Canuck. And Tyler Noble is here. Hello.
Hello.
When we get into just, now that John Tavares is in Toronto and all of this, I think it has to be greeted with something like this. I'm kind of wondering how we speak of Tavares nowadays here.
Just a touch.
Is it a touch?
Just a touch, yeah.
Just a touch. Yeah, so we'll get into that a little bit later. I'm teasing that because I do have a rant about that. We've got some things to say, and you're not going to like it. But first of all, when we were doing this on Agree or Disagree the podcast, we recapped the Vancouver Canucks season, and it was after the Sedins had retired. It was pre-lottery. There was a hope for a guy named Rasmus Dahlin to come into town, which would have also had that, I'm sure, would have happened.
Absolutely.
And I talked about this with Andy, if you could have had, Rasmus Dahlin not getting Dahlin was disappointing, but you are if I told you that there was a possibility of getting Quinn and Jack Hughes instead, what would you say?
I did not think that Hughes was dropping. I sort of thought that with the way the NHL's going and looked at some of the teams ahead, that they would look at his just pure skill, that they would draft him. And I had the thought that maybe Dobson would be there for the Canucks, but not Hughes.
I really didn't know what to think of the draft beyond the first pick. It wasn't like some other drafts where you had a kind of a clear number 1, number 2, and a somewhat of a consensus for 3, and then it kind of follows after that. Clearly Jim Benning felt it was a steal. The guy was, so giddy about it, even in the moment. So that was an encouraging
That was the fastest
sign.
he has ever run.
I don't know. It just, we'll take it, I guess. That's how I see it. Obviously, it's hard when you're not picking in the top 5 to have a guy that meets or a guy that's available that sort of addresses all of the needs or your biggest needs still there at number 7. That's pretty big for the Canucks.
Yeah, I'd say that the only thing that Quinn Hughes isn't is a right shot, but he definitely checks the marks on everything you need out of a new age defenseman.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Andy yesterday suggested that Quinn Hughes can be on the top 4 right now, and if he is not on this team, it is a mistake. That I have heard from other people, the experts, the Ferraros, the Buttons, the upper elite of hockey experts are suggesting you keep Quinn Hughes in Michigan and you let this guy develop. What say you?
I think that there's definitely pros and cons to both. I would like to see him with the Canucks because I think that what he brings is just some absolute dynamicism that blue line absolutely misses. And then a nice secondary pro on that is that Olli Juolevi doesn't have the pressure coming into this season, coming off a bit of an injury, and he's got Hughes ahead of him on the depth chart to become that number one power play defenseman that the Canucks sorely need.
I think that's a great point on Juolevi there. That would certainly deflect a little bit of attention away from him. If I had to put my money on it, I think he does end up spending another year in the NCAA. That has been the trend under this management group, to give those top picks one more year in either junior or college before they get their shot in the NHL. But I would like to see him playing right away. The defense has been badly needing a jolt for a while, particularly on the power play. And the guy's oozing with confidence. Let's see what he can do.
Yeah, and they have a great partner for him waiting in Chris Tanev, someone who has proven to be someone who makes his defense partners better and insulates them really well. And then he's just a smart, quiet defenseman. You pair him with Quinn Hughes, and you've got a really good pairing that could definitely play against most lines in the NHL.
There's been a suggestion. Some are suggesting that he's going to be that the person that he would play with is Gabranson.
Yeah, I don't like that. I think you put him with Chris Tanev and just use Tanev's just stability to help insulate Quinn in his first year if he does turn pro for this coming fall.
Yeah, I would think that if you're going to take somewhat of a risk on plugging an 18-year-old right away on defense, you want to have him with the most stay-at-home guy. So I like the Tanev idea as well.
So what are your defense pairings then? So if you got Hughes and Tanev, you've got Edler, Pouliot, Delzato, Hutton, Gabranson. Am I missing someone?
I would put Edler with Gudbranson. Gudbranson, just before he got injured, finally looked like someone who might be worth the money that Jim Benning is paying him. And you just that pairing looked like a decent top four pairing. Then you've got Stetcher and pick one of Delzato, Hutton, or Pouliot together to make your third pairing.
Yeah, I would concur with that. If Quinn Hughes were to be on the team, it really makes you wonder where Ben Hutton fits in the organization. Certainly not in the top six, though.
Do you think that there's trade value?
I think maybe, but I think that I do think that Travis Green has some hope that a season of some training and maybe an eye opener after last year, we will see maybe a different Ben Hutton come into camp. But I definitely don't see even if they start the season with Pouliot, Hutton, and Delzato, I think they don't end with at least one of those three still on the team.
And one of the things to look at too as they get closer to the end of the preseason is whether they decide of their three extra players that they get to carry at any one time, whether two of them are defensemen or only one, and they carry two extra forwards. That'll be interesting to see if there's some question marks as to the defensive depth and who should stay, who should go. Maybe they carry the two extra D-men and the one extra forward.
Yeah, that'll be interesting because they're as much as Hughes and Tanev would be the ideal pairing. There's been a lot of talk that Tanev is on the trade market, and there's some suggestion he doesn't have a lot of value anyway. And maybe you don't trade Tanev. Maybe you keep Tanev and you look at trading a man. There's something about Ben Hutton there's something I like about him. It's you'd have to give up a lot more than I would want a lot more than you would actually get at this point from Ben Hutton.
Yeah, I think Hutton and Tanev are both probably not getting traded before the beginning of the season. Both need to show better this upcoming season. Tanev just needs to show that he can stay healthy, and Hutton needs to show that he can be an everyday player for the Canucks. And if one or both of those things happen, then you've definitely got some depth to play with to add assets and more draft picks going into the draft next year in Vancouver.
Right, and that's one of the things is the idea of getting as many draft picks as you can for that draft because you're in Vancouver, right? So that'd be great.
Our plan is
looking for something here. Having that draft pick having the draft in Vancouver would be, getting as many picks to that. But then let's go to the forwards because of all the players that the Vancouver Canuck fans were possibly imagining coming and spending 4-year contracts on, the first two to be named would be a Beagle and an Antoine Roussel on an average salary of $3 million for the next 4 years. That made Canuck fans all over Canuck Nation comfortable and happy, and this is the greatest thing ever, right?
Not quite like that, no.
I want to bring up, the anger about Jay Beagle. I get the term argument, but there is something that this guy is going to bring to this team with a Stanley Cup ring. And I know some will say that's a little bit overrated, but there's something that this guy's going to bring to this team that is missing.
I think so. I mean, they've been lacking that guy that's been there, done that in recent times, and he's fresh off a Stanley Cup. All those signings that they made, in my opinion, Beagle, Roussel, and Tim Schaller, they make sense as far as adding experience, character, grit to what is now a much younger team with the Sedins gone. Derek Dorsett retired as well. I don't have much issue with the salary cap hit. It's the 4-year term. I think that's where people are really hung up. It's like, oh my goodness, that's so long, And in the case of Jay Beagle, hey, he's a Stanley Cup winner. You could say he could demand that 4th year, but he's 32 years old. So that's what's kind of scary about it. But I don't know. Maybe it's kind of reckless to say we'll worry about that later. But perhaps that's the thinking.
Yeah, I think that might be the thinking, but I like the Roussel signing. I think he adds the grit and the tenacity that the team lacked last year, especially after Dorsett was forced to retire. But Beagle, that 4th year and add on to the 4th year with Roussel just makes it really tough to swallow for Canucks fans. And then Schaller, it honestly feels like Benning went out and signed 3 different players to fill 3 different roles that Dorsett filled all in one. You've got your teach the kids how to be a professional, because that's what Dorsett did with Horvat and a little bit with Virtanen. You've got the tenacity and agitator role that Dorsett had. That's now being taken care of by Roussel. And then you've got a little bit more of the tough guy role that Schaller has, as well as a bit of tenacity as well. So it feels weird that they had to use 3 guys at a lot more of a cap hit to replace just Dorsett.
I think some of this too is about pushing the new players to earn their spot. Something that Jim Benning and Trevor Linden talk about a little bit, but it doesn't seem to get much of the headlines. But they're not about gifting spots to players. We saw this with Brock Besser, right? He got the healthy scratch the first couple of games under Travis Green. This is not about just handing spots to young guys. And you have these veteran guys in there and that know what it takes to prepare and to compete at the NHL level and stay at a high level. And so having them around, that's good for the development of the younger players. Of course, will any of the younger players bump some established guy out of the opening day lineup? That's what's always this ongoing question.
Yeah, I think that is definitely part of it, as well as putting the kids in more of a offensive role and let the vets sort of carry the heavy lifting on the defensive zone starts. Because they did that a lot with Sutter, and I think adding Beagle they'll be allowed to do that even more. So I think you'll see the Horvat line, and then most likely whatever line Pettersson gets slotted into if he makes the team. Those two lines will definitely get the lion's share of offensive zone starts.
It is something interesting that I think maybe this was the Jets, not really the Jets model, but I'm wondering if this is becoming the model. Because the Flames did this a little bit too with their offseason moves. But there is a sense, especially in Calgary before they were rebuilding. In Montreal, you're hearing this world about rebuilding, let the kids play. Vancouver, it's been about let the kids play. And there's a part of that I'm wondering if maybe teams are seeing a sense of entitlement. This kid's the star. He's going to play whatever. They take the foot off the gas, and they're bringing in a number of veteran guys that can push that competition. Like you look at the forward and the defense, and even goaltending wise in Vancouver, there is a potential to have some competition here.
Mm-hmm.
There is about, realistically, defensively, two defensemen have a spot solidified for sure. Edler and Tanev. And Horvat, Besser, Berchi, and maybe Pettersson is safe in terms of forwards on the forwards. But there's a lot of spots there that people have to compete for. And
I would add Brandon Sutter to that group there.
I would have Sutter on there as an even more solid lock than Berchi. I think with the depth that the Canucks have on the wing, either than Besser, no spot is safe. Because I think you got Pettersson coming up. I think he'll start on the wing. Dahlin, I think, is going to surprise a lot of people and push for a spot. You've got Virtanen, Leipzig, Granlund, Berchi. Like there's too many wingers and not enough spots. So you're definitely going to see. I think you're going to see vets and kids sit this upcoming season at different times.
Mm-hmm. I want to just on the topic of the free agent signings and where the kids fit in and all this. And people cringing at the 4-year term and this and that. Some in the media, and from what I can see, just perusing the Twitter mainly, it seems like a lot of them are associated with TSN for whatever reason. They're really, really just down on the whole Beagle and Roussel term thing. And I just don't understand why people are having trouble getting it with the fact that the Canucks organization does not believe in just throwing out the kids in a sink or swim proposition. It's been clear under this management group that they are not keen on throwing kids out there and having them sink. And I think Jake Virtanen, I think they may have pushed that one a little bit just because he's the BC guy and he was a first-round pick and the fans were screaming to get some younger guys in there. And look what happened. He didn't really succeed right away. Went back to the AHL last year, had a much better season. So I don't know why that's always, being lost. And the club just lost a couple of future Hall of Famers in the Sedins. I mentioned Derek Dorsett being a big loss as well. They have the cap space. They're not a contender facing a cap crunch right now. So what is the big deal with having some veterans around to not only push the kids, but also to make them earn their spot?
Yeah, I think it's just more the combination of cap and term. It's gonna, and then you have Green with how he treated the kids last year. I think there's a lot of worry within the fan base, and then through the media that you're gonna have more kids sitting than the veterans, just because they're vets and they're getting paid more. But I hope that they learn from their mistakes last year, and they can be willing to sit, say, a Gagne or even an Eriksson a game or two at a time to try and just wake them up and even wake the kids up, saying that, look, if you play better than the vet, you will play you. So I do feel that, based off of the conversations that the management team and the coaches have had with the media, that might be the way they're going, but the proof will be in the pudding, and they need to actually show the fan base that that's what they're willing to do.
Well, the other thing with the 4-year term, and the other group that's doing media in Vancouver has been the one that has been pointing this out a little bit more, is 23 teams made an offer for Jay Beagle. So if you have this guy on your list as a guy that is necessary, and it really, like, the way that free agency was set up, it really was about getting those third or fourth line, or getting those middle line forwards and defensemen. You're going to have to adjust and maybe overpay a little bit. And, if 23 teams are going after Jay Beagle, you got to find some edge in some way to do this. And it's not like, and what I'm hearing a lot of the media say, what I would completely disagree with, is this idea that you could have signed a forward with a 1-year deal to be a penalty killer. I just don't buy that. I can't see that.
I think you can, but it won't be, you won't have all the intangibles that Beagle brings. I do think that one thing that is getting overlooked is that Beagle's, as he's 32, but he still only signed the deal before he was 35. So if he, after 2 years, doesn't have the game anymore and decides to retire, the Canucks aren't on the hook for the last 2 years of the deal, cap wise. So I think adding that 4th year may, as bad as it looks optics wise to many fans, might have been a bit of a calculated decision by Betting and company. But like I said, it's tough to sell to the fan base when they all know that it's a rebuild and want to see the kids play.
Optics is a good word to use here, and I would say that it's pretty evident that this management group isn't too concerned with optics. They have their strong beliefs in having the veterans, and if a guy's in high demand, you're either going to have to pay more in salary, or you're going to have to offer a longer term, or you might even have to offer no trade to some extent or whatever. There's only so much that you can have as an advantage, whether that's a warm climate or a certain collection of young players to play with or whatever, or a preferable coach. I mean, those things only go so far with free agents. At some point, you have to show them the money, or you're not going to get them.
Yeah. So, and who knows? This Pacific Division is kind of like, I'm not saying the Canucks are a playoff contending team. That's not what I'm saying. But this division is kind of wide open in a sense that we don't know what we're going to get with the Vegas Golden Knights. The Ducks are a step back. The Oilers, we don't know. The Flames, we don't know. Really, we don't know. The Kings seem like a downswing. This, having a couple of, I'm not saying the Canucks are going to compete necessarily. I'm not saying that there's a playoff But if you get off to a pretty hot start, it does create some interesting things. I don't know.
It does, and if one of those other teams suffers a key injury, say the LA Kings lose Jonathan Quick again for a long period of time, that could really hurt their playoff chances. You didn't mention San Jose there. I think that they're still probably a playoff team, but not a sure thing. So, yeah, I think you're right, Kevin. If the stars align in a certain way, the Canucks could be in that chase.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see, but I just think there's too many. As you said, we don't know what I think you'll see Edmonton take a step forward. I don't think it's going to be a gigantic step forward, but I think they'll be a lot more competitive. I think what the Flames have done, they'll be a lot more competitive going into this season. And yeah, the Ducks, I think, will take a step back, but I think you still have those San Jose, Vegas. I think still will be a borderline playoff team, unless they can surprise again. But I just think the Canucks just don't have the bona fide scoring to get anywhere close, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Just with the talent that's at the top of the draft coming up next year.
Yeah. We didn't get into the goaltending, and we'll get into some of the other prospects here, but when last we left here, we've had Markstrom, Nielsen, Demko. Are we comfortable with this? Are we happy that we're at this point going into September training camp with this three, or do we need another goalie? Or
that's all the Canucks really need right now. You've got Markstrom, who's I think it'd be interesting to see what he does going into next season. After taking his first full season as a starter, Nielsen's he's an acceptable backup, but I do think that Demko will definitely be pushing for starts, if not at the start of the season, but by the end.
I'm fine with those three. I would just like to see when Demko gets called up, get into actual games more often. It was only once last year. The previous season, he got had a small number of call-ups and didn't play. So, when the opportunities are there to bring him up due to injury or what have you, I want to see him play. But otherwise, I think Markstrom, he's not, it's not etched in stone, 100%, bona fide number one, but pretty solidly the number one goalie for the Canucks at this point.
Is there there's some suggesting that DiPietro and Demko there's a goalie controversy. I'm assuming you guys are not seeing that yet.
Oh, not even close. I think that's people looking for too much and too far into the future. DiPietro's still junior age. He's going to go in and he's the favorite to start for Team Canada at the World Juniors. Again, hosted in Vancouver, but that's looking way too far in the future because goalies are voodoo and weird and all that. Because you can have a high pick go be an absolute bust, and you can have like these 5th, 6th rounders after 3-4 years come in and be Vezina Trophy nominees and winners. So
goalies take a while. We saw that with Corey Schneider. He was drafted in 2004, and it wasn't until the 10-11 season before he was the established backup. He got a few calls before then, and those didn't go particularly well. So goalies do take a while. I think it's way too premature to suggest that DiPietro is pushing for that number 3 spot.
Fair enough. Let's go through some of the other prospects or expected, and then we're going to go through some underrated ones. Maybe I'll start with a yes or no. Do this with a yes or no. Is Jake Virtanen on this team next year?
Yes.
Yeah, I believe so as well.
Nikolai Goldobin.
Yes.
Ooh, that's a maybe for me, that one. I think given not just the free agent signings, but the names that we've talked about here already, Pettersson and Dowlin, you start to run out of spots there, right? So I don't know. Goldobin's a maybe for me. As a call up for injury, sure.
Dowlin.
No, but we'll be pushing at the end of the season for a spot.
I would say not on the opening day roster either, no.
Pettersson is obviously on the team. That's a pretty obvious one unless there's an injury or something drastic. Juolevi.
No.
Yeah, Juolevi's a concern for me. This training camp and preseason will be huge for him. If he doesn't impress, there's going to be a lot of people declaring him a bust. So I don't know. The fact that we talked about this the last time we got together, the fact that they drafted a defenseman with their first pick, to me, maybe a signal they're not that sure on Juolevi. So if I had to put money on it, I would say he's probably not on the team to start the season. But again, depending on injuries and need for depth, we might see him. Just going back to Pettersson for a second, it would just be an absolute shock if he wasn't a regular. And if he's not, that's a major setback for the organization.
Yeah. Is there some players flying under the radar that we're not paying attention to that have a shot at making a lineup and need some eyes on?
I don't think there's anyone that will make the team out of camp, but Petrus Palmu, I think, looks like someone who could push for some call-up spots later on in the season and maybe even a spot in the next season.
Palmu was the guy I was going to mention as well. I mean, if you're a sixth-round pick, you're bound to fly under the radar. But 2 seasons ago, he finished 4th amongst all OHL players in scoring with 40 goals and 98 points with Owen Sound. And last season was named the top rookie in the Finnish Liga. So those are some pretty impressive things. And yet there wasn't really much talk about this guy up until recently. And he stood out in the recent prospect camp. So I would agree with Sean that's one to keep an eye on that maybe isn't that much of an attention grabber at this point.
Yeah, that was the guy I was thinking about too. He certainly caught.
I mean, even Cole Lind has been grabbing more attention, just in terms of headlines and names, and maybe that's because of the BC connections. But Palmu's. I think we have the consensus there. He's the guy to watch.
Yeah,
Palmu, Lind, and Dahlin, I think, are going to be the 3 that will be pushing for spots coming up through the season.
Yeah, I can see that too.
As well as I think I don't think Gaudette will be on the opening day lineup. I think he'll start down at centering one of the top 2 lines in Utica, but I think he'll be pushing as well.
Yeah, there'll be talk about him. That's true. I was going to bring him up as well. But he does get he gets some attention out here. But before we move on, we have to have the conversation about Alex Burrows, who retired. The folks in the East seem to want to put him in an Ottawa Senator jersey, but the fact is he made his name with the Canucks. He scored one of the biggest goals in the history. He slayed the Dragon, played on probably the most productive line, one of the most productive lines in Canuck histories. It's funny. I think the conversation has been Canuck fans are in love with Alex Burrows, but everyone else that has played that has not been a fan of the Canucks over the years has been not a fan of Alex Burrows. So tell us from your perspective what Alex Burrows should be mentioned for. There's talk of Ring of Honor. Let's talk about him. Let's talk about what Alex Burrows brought to the Canucks organization.
Well, first off, Alex Burrows is a shoe-in for the Ring of Honor. That is exactly what he deserves as a Canuck. He's not at the top with the Sedins and the Naslund and Linden for jersey retirement, but he's a cult hero in Vancouver for the many numerous big goals he's scored. As you said, being on the line with the Sedins, just arguably the best line that the Canucks have ever had. He just brought this great story of starting in ball hockey and then working his way up through the ECHL and then coming up with the Moose and then getting the call up and just working his butt off until he got to given the chance to play with the Sedins and just never looked back and just kept going.
It's hard to become a polarizing figure unless you're effective. And, Alex is certainly a polarizing figure outside the Canucks fan base. He'll be remembered for pick your negative connotation, despicable, unlikable, dirty, whatever you want to use for a word. That's what people outside the Canucks fan base are likely to think. But he's not the only guy that's retired with regrettable moments, whether it's verbal low blows or whatever. He's not the first and won't be the last. In Vancouver, he'll certainly be remembered as a hero. We talk about slaying the dragon. I mean, that was one of 3 playoff overtime goals. He clinched a series against St. Louis in 2009, I believe it was. He got an overtime winner in the 2011 Stanley Cup Final. The slay the dragon goal, I mean, that's one that's just replayed over and over by Canuck fans on the internet and will be probably for years to come when you're looking for a little pick-me-up, so to speak. Few Canucks have possessed the clutch play and the flair for the dramatic. Alex Burrows was one of them. To me, Trevor Linden was another, a guy that, picked up his game in Game 7 situations. And the Sedins, we should note that the Sedins have emphatically declared him the best line mate they ever had. So that says a lot about his skill. All this from an undrafted player, a small guy that had some long odds to make the show, and he made the most of it.
I'd also like to say that there's the goal that saved Vigneault's job back in the it might have been the 2010-11 season or the 2009-2010 season where he broke the slump and mocked breaking his stick over his leg to say that when they had that big long losing streak.
That's right. Yeah, I think that was against Carolina, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah.
I don't. It wasn't the year of the Cup run. I think it was the year before, the 09-10, which you mentioned. Yeah. No, that's been mentioned by a few people as well. It was a big one.
Yeah, watching from a player's perspective, yeah, he was an absolute pest, and I can't deny it. But he was absolutely effective at what he did, and I don't think it goes unstated here. You look what happened. Ottawa is an unmitigated disaster, but they were also one game away from the Stanley Cup, and you can't help but wonder what Alex Burrows brought to that dressing room. Because ultimately, on paper, they were no match for the Pittsburgh Penguins. No match at all, but they found a way to hang in there, and that's probably because of an influence like Alex Burrows. It's understated what he did in Ottawa. I don't think people talk enough about what he... was it statistical? No. But he brought something to Ottawa that I think was valuable.
Well, we talk about slaying the dragon. That Game 7, they had choked up a 3-0 series lead, and he gets the only 2 goals of the game for the Canucks.
Yeah.
So there's a guy that just never seemed to be rattled by the magnitude of a game. Yeah. And that kind of presence has to help a team on a run.
Yeah.
Yeah, he definitely probably in the room. He's definitely one of those guys that you love on your team, and despite his antics on the ice and his unfortunate inability to get a little too emotional and say things that he shouldn't have, or do things that he shouldn't have, he was definitely off the ice one of the more classy players that. Anyone's had that the Canucks have had a chance to have on their team of late.
Yeah. And moving to this area and understanding that you kind of get a different perspective of what Alex Burrows meant to this organization and to this city. I do suspect it will put him in the Ring of Honor. I could see him being a head coach in the NHL one day. He's being an assistant in the AHL. I can see him being a coach. He did say he wanted to be a GM too, so I think we're going to hear more from Alex Burrows as time.
Oh yeah, I think he'll be back with the Canucks in some sort of coaching or managerial position within the next 3 to 5 years after he cuts his teeth with the Laval Rocket.
Yeah, he might become a hot coaching candidate though. You never know. It'll be interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, just you guys had Burrows and Kessler. Who was more effective, Burrows or Kessler?
Well, that's a tough one.
I would say Burrows, just because I think his, as we said, his ability to be super clutch, as well as he did it all without playing on the power play. Like, he got minimal power play time. Well, Kessler a lot of his goals in his big seasons, production wise, came on the power play, feeding off of the extra man with the Sedins, while Burrows did a lot of it 5-on-5.
And Kessler is a center, Burrows was a winger. I think just by default, you have a greater ability to have that kind of impact from the middle of the ice. Kessler certainly would have benefited from the power play. I'd give the edge to Burrows, but only slightly.
All right. Well, let's move on to other things that have happened. Like, you may have heard that there was a signing in Toronto on July 1st. And it's been hailed across Toronto. They almost haven't. I think they're sort of stopping to talk about it now. They've moved on to some other things, maybe not. So I'm going to start here, and I'm going to start with a couple of things here. I'm not going to dispute the talent of John Tavares. He was a guy that has been on the Olympic team. He is a number 1 pick. He is an impact player. I'll grant you all of this. He was in top 10 in scoring. But this was a number 1 pick that has been in the playoffs 3 times. This is a guy that has only been in the second round once. And now all of a sudden there is a Stanley Cup parade apparently being planned around Young and Bloor for the Toronto Maple Leafs for the 2018-19 season. They have the best 1-2 center combination in the Eastern Conference. Someone forgot to tell Crosby and Malkin that. They have been saintized by the Toronto media. There's a part of me that wants to say that this may go down as one of the most overrated signings in NHL history.
I think that only happens if Tavares doesn't live up to what he's played in the past. I think putting him down, saying that he's only been in the playoffs 3 times in his career, I think that's hard. Like, hockey's such a team game. It's not like basketball where one player makes a huge difference.
Okay, but let me counter you with Alex
Burrows running the Islanders into the ground. It's really tough for me to say that you got to do that. But I definitely see where you're coming from in the fact that it's Toronto, and they got their hometown. They finally got their home province, hometown hero to come back and play for the Maple Leafs.
But what about Alex Ovechkin? This was a guy that has his organization hasn't been running the ground. There's been a load of talent on that team, and he has been criticized immensely for not being able to get past Sidney Crosby until this year. There have been people calling him one of the most overrated hockey players in history. And we don't have that same conversation about a John Tavares. How does Tavares get away with that? Because the Islander organization has been run to the ground, and we're criticizing Alex Ovechkin for basically not succeeding in the same team game.
Well, I was going to say, think you just need to look at a birth certificate to get an answer to that. I mean, the hallelujah music and all the fanfare about John Tavares coming home. Yeah, it was the childhood dream. We saw the tweet with the bed sheets and all that. But I mean, I think that there is a tendency for the media to give the Ontario-born star players a bit of a pass when they're struggling, or if their team is falling short of expectations. Whereas a guy like an Alex Ovechkin, he's Russian, or Sidney Crosby's from Atlantic Canada, I think it's easier to start, putting them in the crosshairs when things aren't going well.
Yeah, there's a bit of that. Plus, Ovi's got that flamboyant, outgoing personality, while Tavares is back to the traditional, low-key, stereotypical hockey player with the cliche answers. And when you put yourself out there, like Ovi does, like a Subban does, you're going to get in the NHL and in the hockey circles, you're going to get a lot more pushback, especially when you don't win.
Here's what I find truly remarkable with the coverage of the Tavares signing. I don't want this to come across as people thinking that I feel Tavares is overrated. He was drafted first overall for a reason, and I think that was warranted at the time. But I think what the Leafs are doing is a major gamble. I mean, it's a huge change to what they were doing. They were making great progress. Now, Tavares is an upgrade over Tyler Bozak, sure, but Bozak was a guy that had been there through the ups and downs. He's gone now. James Van Riemsdyk has left in free agency as well. Tavares is there. This is a team that's a lot different now than people are really paying much attention to, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work. There's no guarantees about just bringing this guy in and it's going to work. It's a major shakeup, and that's not even talking about captaincy at some point down the road. $11 million cap hit, that obviously leaves them less room to address other needs. And yet not a single pundit anywhere is using the word gamble or discussing at all the risk involved in making such a big splash like this. Austin Matthews was the franchise. Is he now? That's a question. If they intend to keep Matthews around, you'd have to think he'd be looking for a similar type of deal as Tavares. That's a lot of salary in a couple of forwards. What about other needs? What about Mitch Marner? What do you do with him? There's still a lot of unanswered questions about the long-term plan to keep all these guys. I know Kyle Dubas was asked, can you keep them all? He says we can and we will. How they achieve that, though, is a challenge. We'll have to wait and see. I will say this: if it works out, Kyle Dubas and Brendan Shanahan are going to look like the biggest hockey geniuses ever. But hockey has shown, or history has shown, that more often than not, these big splash, big name free agent signings for big money often yield underwhelming results.
Yeah, there's definitely that concern of the shakeup in the locker room, because you had basically the kids growing up together, building a team together, and now you throw in Big John, and what's that gonna do to the locker room and the cohesiveness there? And you never know. You just look at the for an extreme example, look at Ottawa and how that locker room fell apart, and it bled onto the ice and created a team that just was one win away from the Stanley Cup Finals to becoming a lottery team.
Yeah, and I mean that's Kyle Turris departs, and he was a guy wearing an A on his jersey and seemed to be a big part of their success. And then he's gone, and Matt Duchene comes in, and suddenly it's not the same. They got off to a great start to the season, and then after that deal was made, wow, what a change!
Yeah,
like I say, history would have me concerned about whether this is going to work, but it just seems like such a Toronto thing to do. Concern over how things are going to fit just never seems to be an issue because it's the Maple Leafs, because there's supposed to be this prestige associated with wearing the blue and white, and that they'll all just figure it out. Well, I mean, they do have a great coach, and that will help, but this is a wait-and-see thing for me, for sure.
And really, I still have them third in that division, even without, right at this point, because we don't know where Erik Karllson is. I still think Tampa is miles ahead of him. If they get Erik Karllson, we might be talking.
Some of that is definitely up because Toronto's blue line isn't up to snuff compared to the to Tampa's blue line, especially if they're a bit able to add Karllson, and then you've got Boston's blue line, which has a good young core with McAvoy, Carlo, and Krug, and then you've got the veteran in Chara. Right? It's just I definitely think they're third in that division, even with Tavares as well. It'll be a lot closer, but yeah, I until they can figure out how to put together a blue line that can actually shut down these teams without having to play trap hockey, they're going to continue to be behind the big dogs.
On the note about the blue line for the Maple Leafs, one of the things I found very interesting about the coverage on July 1st was that the one guy on the TSN panel that was speaking cautiously about this, trying to pump the brakes a little bit, was Jeff O'Neill. And this guy would know this situation better than anyone. He was a guy picked high in a draft, eventually went home to play for the Maple Leafs and found it challenging. And what he pointed out is that, that's not a championship caliber defense. So the counter argument to that is, well, we're going to possess the puck lots. We won't need to worry about our defense. I don't know. I mean, analytics, you can give me whatever analytics you want. The adage that defense wins championships, to me, is still a tried, tested, and true approach.
Yeah, but and my thing is if you can't get at the puck, you can't possess the puck.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So unless you're winning every face-off and controlling the puck from whistle to whistle, you're going to have to play defense. And if you can't play defense, you're not winning games.
Or your goaltender has to stand on his head. And Freddie Anderson had a great season last year. What if he has a Cam Talbot-like regression?
Well, here's the Leafs defense as of right now. As of this recording, 6:41. Connor Carrick, Jake Gardiner, Ron Hainsey, Morgan Riley, Nikita Zaitsev. Tell me what's wrong with that picture.
You've got Hainsey's old and has a lot of miles under him. You have Jake Gardiner, who is either good or absolutely horrible. And then Connor Carrick is. Connor Carrick and Travis Dermott are the two sort of young guys pushing for spots who could change it, but I think until they can find a steadying force on that blue line, it's tough to say that they have the horses to push for a cup.
Yeah, and I've seen some analyses that have Ron Hainsey on the top pair, and with all due respect to Ron Hainsey, he's a Stanley Cup champion. I mean, that's just, I don't know. That would concern me as a Maple Leaf fan to see that.
Yeah, it's that right side that's the issue with the Leafs. When you've got basically Hainsey as your top right side guy, it's tough.
It's looking a little thin.
Yeah.
Well, and they only have 5 on the roster now. And yes, you're right, they can sign Dermott, but that's not a lot of depth on defense. And that, it's not only that you need, people have made the argument about Pittsburgh, but that was such a very different situation where there was a lot of depth on that team where you could do that. If one of these guys goes down, that's even worse. It's paralleling that to Pittsburgh, especially when you have a guy that realistically you could argue is at very least top 10 of all time, maybe top 5, and a guy that really should be in your top 100 of all time in Evgeny Malkin, that's a very different situation than what we're presented here.
Yep.
No disrespect to Matthews and Tavares, but they're not Crosby and Malkin, not yet. And I still, I'm very curious about this Babcock-Matthews relationship because there was some friction. You can't. I agree with you, Tyler. What are you bringing in? If you believe that Austin Matthews is your generational franchise player, you're signing a guy for 8 years, $77 million, which is franchise money.
Yeah, I mean, that makes you wonder what Austin Matthews is thinking.
I'll be honest. I think that calling Austin Matthews a franchise generational player is a little bit of an overhyped, but that's what Toronto does. I think he's a step below those generational players like the Crosbys and the McDavids, and I think that is why they decided to bring in Tavares. But saying that they're the best 1-2 punch in up the middle. When you've got Crosby, Malkin, you've got even in Tampa, you've got Stamkos and Johnson and as well as Braden Point, as well as Krejci Bergeron in Boston. You could make an argument that it'd be tough for them to be even in the top two. I think until they prove that they can actually do it together. I think you got to give it to the center depth to the other two teams.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the loss of Van Riemsdyk, yes, you get more back, but that 35 goals, and I know that size isn't playing a huge factor, but 35 goals from Van Riemsdyk, they are going to miss that in some way, shape, or form, and I don't think they have the wingers to match that number, but you could make the argument that Tavares will make a winger better. Sure, that'll be interesting. But I think, it's going to be if there is no one right now, well, actually there's going to be one other person. There's two players that have a pressure to win. One is John Tavares, I think, and the other is Erik Karllson. Because if you are acquiring Erik Karllson, you are putting your chips in the middle of the table that you're all in to win a Stanley Cup.
Well, I think it depends on where he goes. Like, I think Tampa's already in that position, so I think if he goes there, I don't see the pressure being as big as if he goes to, say, a Dallas or a Vegas, where he becomes a much bigger star than anyone on those teams. Because if Yzerman can pull a rabbit out of his hat and be this magical cap guy and make that work, you've got Stamkos, you've got Hedman, you've got and then you add in Karllson, and depending on who they have to give up to make that work cap wise, maybe they still have Kucherov. There's still a lot of star power on Tampa, but if he goes anywhere else, then there's definitely going to be some pressure on him to make sure that happens.
I could see obviously Tampa Bay being interested, given how close they are. Obviously, getting a deal done has proven to be a lot more complicated than maybe some people imagined with salary cap considerations and whatnot. We mentioned Vegas here. They were reportedly interested in acquiring Karllson before. I would think that Dallas is a little more motivated to make that deal happen. So if it's not Tampa Bay, I think Dallas is where Erik Karllson ends up. And if you're Ottawa, you'd much prefer that he gets dealt to the other conference.
But Karlsson's got his no movement clause, and he controls basically where he goes. And I believe the rumor is that at this point, the only place he's willing to go is Tampa.
Well, what I definitely don't see is him going to another Canadian team. That's pretty clear. Yeah,
I can see that. Imagine Karllson versus Hoffman in Florida. But the one thing, I'm just going to put this out there. If Toronto and Tampa meet in the playoffs and Tampa gets Karllson and Toronto beats them, what's that narrative about Erik Karllson?
If it's Toronto, then they'll definitely throw a nice little narrative that he can't win in there. But I think again, since we're we're on the rant about Toronto. That's just what Toronto would do at that point. But I think that's unfair. As I said earlier, this is such a team game that you need the depth and everything, and sometimes you just run into a hot goalie in the playoffs. So, but yeah, definitely there would be a narrative put on there. He would definitely add on to a bit of get that little bit of that Ovi rub on being the guy, the player that can't get it done.
Mm-hmm. Which would be interesting. Let's go through some other off-season stuff here. Who's winning other than, okay, it's hard to not say that Toronto in some ways hasn't won the off-season in terms of getting the best player at this point. But who else has done well in this off-season?
I like the moves that St. Louis has made, bringing back David Perron and adding Bozak and Ryan O'Reilly. They're all experienced guys. They're a team that had a disappointing season last year. They're not in a position, I don't think, to drop the bomb on it and start over. So I think those are guys that should help the Blues get back to the playoffs. The other one I wanted to mention is Buffalo. I mean, obviously it helps that you win the draft lottery and you pick Rasmus Dahlin there at number 1, but they traded away O'Reilly. Presumably O'Reilly wasn't that keen on being there. Got a pretty decent return, I think. A couple of veteran forwards in Vladimir Sobotka and Patrick Berglund, plus a prospect, a couple of picks. So Buffalo's looking a lot better based on the offseason so far.
I would agree on St. Louis. As good as the return looks for Buffalo, St. Louis didn't give up any of their top prospects in that deal to get O'Reilly. They still have Kyrie. They still have Robert Thomas. They've got so much depth up front, and they've got an absolute a menace of a top 4 defense. When you've got Bouwmeester, you've got Parayko, Pietrangelo, and Edmondson. I think that's arguably one of the top 4 defense in at least the Western Conference, if not the whole league.
That Central Division is with Nashville, Winnipeg, St. Louis. That's a beast. That's a beast.
It's going to be tough to come out of there. But I definitely like what St. Louis has done to beef themselves up. You've got because you can now shift some of their smaller forwards who are playing center to the wing, and because it's getting a bit to the point where opposite of the 90s where you've had the little center and the big wingers, you now have the big center and the little wingers to create your offense. I'm cautiously optimistic, but a team that's flying under the radar in terms of winning is Calgary. Now, I know that there are some people that don't think that this Dougie Hamilton trade is a great trade, but it really is going to depend on what you think Noah Hanifin is going to turn out to be. He's not at Dougie Hamilton level at this point in time. No, he's going to be a number 4. But you look at what Elias Lindholm is going to bring. I think he's a guy that can play in at least your top 3 center. He's a guy that can be a winger in your top 2. You bring in James Neal, who I think does bring consistency. Is it a little bit of an overpay? Probably, but I think he is definitely a guy that you can have in your top 6. I think Hanifin is who you're going to get for the next 4 or 5 years is what he is now. He was one of the targets for Benning apparently when they were in the let's see what we can get for the 7th pick mode. So there was a lot of talk that in Canucks circles, and basically the general consensus was that even though he's putting up a decent amount of points now, his ability to take it to the next level probably isn't there. I think it's unfortunate that Dougie Hamilton couldn't make it work in Calgary. I definitely think he needs to be in a market like Carolina where there is a lot less scrutiny on what you do day in and day out, because apparently he's not one of those he's not your stereotypical boys boy hockey player where you do everything as a team. He definitely liked his alone time, and I think that rubbed many people in the Flames organization the wrong way.
Yeah, I think I do agree with you in terms of what was presented here. I think he, just his approach doesn't make him a bad teammate. It just makes him an introvert, which isn't a bad teammate. But there were times when I watched Dougie Hamilton that he did make some key mistakes at key times that I think also rubbed his teammates the wrong way. Penalty against Anaheim in the playoffs a couple years ago. Evander Kane took him to school last year in a huge game in Calgary where the Flames were dominating for most of that game, and Kane goes down and scores and basically turns that game around. There were just times that Dougie Hamilton, when Dougie Hamilton was needed, he didn't come through. I'm not saying Noah Hannafin is a star, but I think he's going to be solid. I think what Lindholm is going to bring is a lot more creativity in terms of what you have in line combinations in Calgary, because basically you knew what you were going to get in Calgary. You knew that you're going to have Monahan, Gaudreau, and Ferland, and then Backlund, Tkachuk, and Ferland, and then not much else in your bottom six. And now you have an option to bring a lot of a different attack, which I do like.
I do think that Lindholm is the guy that Flames fans need to watch and gauge of whether they will win or lose this deal. I think he's got the more potential to be the best player out of this deal than Hannafin. And then for the Hurricanes, I think the guy lost in the shuffle is Fox. He's apparently got a lot of offensive upside, and I know there was rumblings that he wasn't willing to sign with Calgary, but losing him in that deal is, I think, an underrated part.
Well, that would be a counter to a first-round pick.
I was just going to say, just quickly there, guys, it does feel like a little bit of a swapping of parts, but we haven't mentioned Bill Peters here. I mean, he becomes the coach of the Flames after previously being the coach of the Hurricanes. So there is I think for the Flames a bit of knowing what they're getting here. So I would give this trade a chance, see how it works out.
Yeah, and then that's again one of my holdups on giving the Flames a full thumbs up as a team on the rise for next year is Bill Peters. Haven't heard glowing reviews of his defensive structure that he ran in Carolina, and one of the reasons why his goaltending was so spotty down there was that just the structure was not good enough to support the goalies, and if that falls apart again on the Flames, then they don't have a chance.
Yeah, that's fair. It's cautious for me. Who's having a terrible offseason? I mean, other than the Montreal Canadiens, who may not be aware of the
that was what I was going to say.
Well, I was just say Ottawa.
Yeah, I mean,
Ottawa's had a absolutely, and it's not even stuff to do with the roster mostly. It's all this off-ice turmoil drama from the Karllson Hoffman deal to their assistant GM to Melnick being Melnick. Until they can get that all settled, it's really tough to see them doing much to really improve going forward. And it doesn't even matter what they pick up.
For as bleak as things seem in Ottawa, and they are bleak, I mean, it's obviously tough to hear rumors of the star player being traded, but I have to go with Montreal. I mean, it's so devastating to find out that Shea Weber will be out 5 to 6 months. I mean, I can't see them finishing any higher than 29th. Mark Bergevin has not demonstrably improved that team. He did make a bit of a splash there with the Galchenyuk, Max Domi trade, but to me, that's not clearly a net upgrade for the team. So I don't know. Montreal's a big concern. You know, if you ask this question in Toronto, some of them might say that Vancouver has had a bad offseason, but you know, we've obviously covered this quite extensively. So I don't know. Other than that, it's hard to say. I mean, there's a lot of teams we're not really hearing much about in terms of the offseason. a team that I was thinking about earlier in this podcast here is in regards to the Central Division is Minnesota. Like, are they going to take a step forward? What are they going to do that's big to try and get over the hump? They're consistently a playoff team, but they're not getting anywhere either in a tough division. That's one I'm waiting to see something happen there.
Yeah, they're definitely treading water. New GM hasn't really done much, but they definitely have some younger players coming up. But it's definitely going to be tough within that division, even with the likes of Chicago sort of petering out.
Mm-hmm. We'll end with this team. What are we looking at with the Edmonton Oilers here? They brought in Tobias Reeder. They brought in Kyle Brodziak. Poll on Twitter is, would you trade Milan Lucic? Who some have saying he's asked to be traded. I don't know if that's true or not. Would you trade him? Would you keep him? Where are the Oilers? What are we looking at here?
The Oilers sort of fall on whether or not that blue line can at least give Cam Talbot a chance, and if Cam Talbot can rebound, because we all know McDavid can score. He can lead the league in points, but the Oilers can still be a bottom feeder. But it just comes down to that blue line, and if they can figure out how to put together an NHL blue line.
I think when it comes to Lucic, number one is, can you trade him? The term and the cap hit are a challenge there for sure. And then two is what kind of return you're going to get. I mean, it's hard to imagine they're going to get a return that is going to knock the socks off of Oilers fans.
Yeah, you're actually going to, they'll probably have to pay to get rid of him, honestly.
Yeah. So, what's that doing for your salary cap concerns there too, right? I mean, it really tough situation for Edmonton. It was I talk about Tavares being a gamble for Toronto. I mean, Lucic was beyond gamble. I mean, that was just a bit of a reckless signing.
Yeah, it was a PR move.
It was. Remember, that was the summer with that he came and even looked at Vancouver, and Vancouver ended up going with Eriksson. And as bad as Eriksson looked as a Canuck, he looks a lot better than Lucic has looked as an Oiler.
Yeah, that was the signing of Eriksson, Lucic, and Brouwer. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Is there anything else we need to cover, or we've covered a lot on this one, I think? But
yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to get on the Toronto media anymore. I got more to say potentially on that, but I think we've killed that one.
We'll get into it in August when they do the John Tavares documentary on his love for the Leafs and where he has his coffee and stuff. There's still lots to talk about. I almost did I have a special report I was going to do. John Tavares is taking the subway today. It's unknown if he's going to Young or Blur, or if he's going to sit on the left side or the right side. TSN will have more coverage as we go along in the day. Brock Besser scores 5 goals. John Tavares is taking the subway.
Yeah, that's definitely how the West feels when Toronto media gets a hold of a story they like.
Well, maybe just one thing to squeeze in here quickly, both for the Maple Leafs and the Canucks is captaincy. That's something that's come up with John Tavares. People are speculating that he's probably going to be the guy. I think that had to have been part of the sell to get him to come there, even though the general manager has been pretty clear that that's a decision they won't rush. Of course, now with the Sedin's gone, that's a question for the Canucks as well.
I think going forward, at least into this season, I think going with rotating alternate captains is the way to go. You can't just. I don't think putting a C on anyone and forcing that role on anyone, even if it is a veteran. Well, if it's a veteran, then you're going to have backlash from the fan base, and if you put it on the likes of a Bo Horvat, I would prefer it if they let whoever of the younger core sort of develop into that naturally.
Yeah, I'm of the belief it has to be organic from within the dressing room. You can't just slap it on a guy and assume that it's going to work. I would think that Bo Horvat is the front runner for the Canucks, but he hasn't even played a single game yet without the presence of the Sedins. So I don't think it really means a whole lot until you're, potentially a playoff team where you're looking at that one guy to really pick up the socks for the team. So I would hope that they go the whole season and figure it out after that.
I could make an argument you can go 2 seasons and not have it.
Yeah,
because realistically, Quinn Hughes can make an impact and be a captain of the team if whoever the number 1 pick is, and if it's Jack Hughes, there's an opportunity there too. I would wait 2 years. I wouldn't even wait 1. I'd wait 2.
Yeah, it just depends on how things go this year. I would think if Bo Horvat or even Brock Besser really step up and take the bull by the horns and just become the de facto leader of that dressing room, then you give it to them.
Yeah.
But if there's no one actually, if there's still some doubt, then yeah, there's no harm in going another season. Look at the Leafs. They've gone, I think, 3 or 4 seasons without a captain, and it hasn't hurt them.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's a huge thing right now. I think that's something that can wait and develop. But let's leave it there. It was a good conversation. Thank you guys again for joining. How do we follow you guys?
I'm at Bearded Canuck 03.
Bearded Canuck 03.
And I'm the very simple at TNoble, TNOBLE on Twitter.
Cool. And of course, you can follow me, KAVOLE. The podcast _hockey is where you will find this one on Twitter. You can like the Hockey Podcast on Facebook as well. And we will talk to you all very soon. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to the Hockey Podcast. We'll talk to you all soon. Bye for now.